What if I told you some of the healthiest, most resilient, and most life-saving vegetables ever grown have completely vanished from your plate, and you don't even know they existed? Imagine walking through a modern grocery store filled with polished produce only to realize that dozens of nutrient-packed superfoods medieval people relied on for survival have been forgotten by history. Vegetables that grew effortlessly without chemicals. Greens that healed wounds, cured winter scurvy, and kept entire villages alive when nothing else would grow. Roots so delicious that kings demanded them in palace gardens gone. Herbs that flavored medieval feasts and prevented famine erased by time. Today we obsess over Kale quinoa and imported superfoods, but these flashy trends are nothing compared to the powerhouse plants that once fed Europe through war plague and brutal winters. Our ancestors knew the land intimately. They didn't need synthetic supplements or Instagram diets. They had chickweed growing underfoot, sea kale on the shoreline, and skirret multiplying quietly underground like a natural food bank. These weren't just vegetables. They were survival tools. So how did we forget them? Why did we abandon crops that needed no fertilizers, no greenhouses, no delicate handling, just a little space and patience? The truth is, modern farming chose fast, big, and pretty over reliable, nutritious, and sustainable. And in doing so, we lost an entire chapter of edible history. This isn't just about food, it's about what we've sacrificed in the name of convenience. If we can rediscover these medieval superfoods, we might just uncover a path back to truly resilient, healthy living. So buckle up, because the 15 vegetables you're about to meet may change everything you thought you knew about what real food looks like. Imagine a vegetable so sweet, so reliable, and so beloved that medieval kings demanded it be grown in royal gardens, and yet today, almost no one has heard its name. Meet skirret, the forgotten crown jewel of medieval agriculture. Long before potatoes conquered Europe, skirret was the underground treasure that fed both nobles and peasants through brutal winters. It didn't just grow, it thrived quietly, multiplying beneath the soil like nature's secret savings account. And unlike modern crops that demand constant care, skirret practically grew itself. No pesticides, no replanting, just resilience and reward. But what truly set skirret apart was its flavor. Naturally sweeter than carrots or parsnips, it offered a rich, delicate taste that could charm even the most jaded medieval palate. Royalty couldn't get enough. Palaces across Europe carved out special plots for these white, slender roots, not for show, but for genuine indulgence. This wasn't peasant food dressed up. This was luxury grown from the earth, a vegetable with VIP status. And it wasn't just a treat. Skirret was a lifeline. During harsh winters when other crops failed and hunger loomed, skirret endured. Its hardy nature meant families could rely on it even when the fields turned to frost. Old farming records speak of it as the comfort of the poor man's table, a humble crop that offered dignity when survival was uncertain, and its versatility was unmatched. Roasted, boiled, added to stews, or even baked into sweet pies, skirret was the medieval kitchen's quiet hero. So how did we lose it? Modern agriculture moved on. Crops that grew faster, looked prettier, or produced bigger yields took the spotlight. Skirret, with its slow-growing, multi-rooted form, was too inconvenient for industrial farming. But what we gained in efficiency, we lost in taste, nutrition, and history. Skirret wasn't just a vegetable. It was a symbol of patience, resilience, and nature's generosity. Bringing it back to our tables isn't just about curiosity. It's about reclaiming a lost relationship with food that nourishes both body and soul. If royalty once treasured it, maybe it's time we did too. Imagine a plant so bold, it refused to stay in the garden. A green renegade that grew like a weed, but fed like a delicacy. In the forgotten corners of medieval Europe, Alexander's wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. This humble herb didn't just survive, it thrived, pushing past fences, sprouting along coastal cliffs and popping up uninvited in roadsides and fields. And yet somehow we've erased it from our diets. Why? Because it didn't fit into neat modern farming boxes. But in medieval times, Alexander's was a gift, wild, edible, and astonishingly useful. Every part of this plant was a culinary tool. The young shoots were sautéed like asparagus or celery. The seeds ground into a spicy pepper substitute. The leaves flavored soups and stews with a bold parsley meat celery kick. Even the flowers were tossed into salads. In a time when food had to do more than just fill the stomach, when it had to preserve, medicate, and nourish, Alexander's was a Swiss Army knife of nutrition. And best of all, it grew without being asked. No pampering, no replanting, no fertilizers. Just nature doing what it does best, providing. Its ambitions were as wild as its roots. Unlike modern crops that require curated conditions, Alexander's grew like it had something to prove, tall, bright, and defiant. Medieval people didn't plant Alexander's because they wanted to. They harvested it because they couldn't stop it from growing. It was the plant that crashed the garden party and brought dinner. But like many unpolished treasures, Alexander's was eventually replaced. Celery, with its crunch, uniformity, and market appeal, took over the kitchen. Alexander's was too wild, too odd, too real. And so it vanished from our gardens and plates, retreating into the cracks of forgotten history. Yet maybe it's time to bring this rebel back. In a world obsessed with perfection, Alexander's reminds us that nourishment doesn't have to come in plastic packaging or manicured rows. Sometimes the best food is the one that shows up uninvited, wild, useful, and unapologetically itself. What if I told you there was once a vegetable so reliable, so nutritious, and so low maintenance that it practically grew itself, and yet we abandoned it? Meet Good King Henry, the forgotten monarch of medieval gardens. It didn't wear a crown, but it ruled over the plates of peasants and nobles alike for centuries. This humble plant was the kind of crop modern farmers dream of, no replanting, no fuss, and it kept coming back year after year like clockwork. In a world where food scarcity was a matter of life or death, Good King Henry was more than a vegetable, it was survival in green form. Despite its royal name, no one quite knows how it earned the title. Maybe it was irony, or maybe people just knew it deserved respect. Because this plant didn't just show up, it delivered. Rich in iron, loaded with vitamin C, and bursting with nutrients often missing from medieval diets. Good King Henry was a powerhouse in disguise. In the hungry gap of early spring, when last year's stores had run out and the new crops hadn't arrived, this perennial hero provided fresh green leaves, sometimes the only thing standing between a family and starvation. Culinarily, it was the triple threat of the medieval kitchen. The tender shoots cooked like asparagus, the mature leaves like spinach, and the unopened flower buds, believe it or not, were used like tiny broccoli florets. It was nature's all-in-one kitchen gadget before gadgets existed. Even medieval doctors swore by it. Its leaves were applied to wounds, its roots boiled for tea, and its reputation spread through folklore as a cure-all. They called it all good. And they meant it. But then came commercial farming. Suddenly crops were chosen for how well they traveled, not how well they nourished. The dependable Good King Henry, with its modest looks and slow-growing roots, was pushed aside. Not flashy enough, not fast enough, not profitable enough. Yet in a time where people crave resilience, sustainability, and real nutrition, maybe we've underestimated this forgotten king. Good King Henry didn't need royal treatment. It was the royal treatment. and it's quietly waiting, ready to reclaim its throne in our gardens and on our plates. Imagine biting into a vegetable and tasting oysters. No, that's not a prank, it's Salsify, the seafood impersonator of the medieval garden. In an era where religion dictated when you could eat meat or fish, this strange root wasn't just a culinary curiosity, it was a lifeline. Monks cultivated it in monastery gardens as a fish substitute during Lent. And here's the twist. When properly prepared, Salsify didn't just look like a humble root, it actually tasted like oysters. It was the medieval answer to "I want seafood," but God said no. This uncanny flavor made Salsify more than a novelty. It was survival with a gourmet twist. When the rivers froze and the coastline storms raged, medieval families could still dig up this unassuming root from frozen ground. It stored well for months, required no refrigeration, and offered essential variety in the bleakest parts of winter. Its subtle, briny taste became a treasured reminder of fish when fish weren't allowed or simply couldn't be found. In a world without grocery stores or food trucks, Salsify was the underground miracle, literally. There were two kinds, white and black. Both looked like something you'd throw away if you didn't know better, gnarly, muddy, twisted sticks. But beneath the dark skin was creamy white flesh that softened beautifully when roasted, boiled, or added to stews. Medieval cooks transformed this ugly duckling into elegant dishes, while fasting monks praised its flavor and endurance. Yet despite all this, Salsify fell victim to modern agriculture's beauty standards. It grows slowly, looks weird, and doesn't photograph well, next to shiny carrots and Instagram-perfect kale. So we forgot it. But what did we lose in the process today, when people pay top dollar for plant-based seafood or exotic root vegetables? It's almost laughable that we abandoned Salsify centuries ago. It was sustainable, it was nutritious, and it was delicious. All we had to do was wait for it to ripen slowly, like the flavors of a good story. Salsify is proof that some of the most powerful foods don't scream for attention. They whisper secrets from the soil. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we listened. Imagine biting into a fruit that looks like it's already gone bad and realizing it's the best thing you've ever tasted. That was the medlar, the medieval fruit that defied logic, beauty, and first impressions. Hard as a rock and bitter as regret when picked fresh, the medlar was completely inedible until it rotted. Yes, rotted. But not in the way we think of spoiled food. Medlars had to blet a process where they softened over weeks into a mushy, brown, jam-like consistency. In short, they had to die a little to taste alive. In a world obsessed with appearance, the medlar was an outcast. It looked like a bruised mini apple with a gaping bottom, so unusual that medieval farmers gave it nicknames that we can't repeat here without risking demonetization. But beneath its rough, even obscene exterior, something miraculous happened. It turned into a sweet, cinnamon-like delicacy. After bletting, the flesh transformed into something between applesauce and spiced honey. It was the dessert of choice when winter stripped the land bare of fresh fruit. Medieval cookbooks praised it. Nobles ate it in jellies, tarts, and wines. For peasants, it was one of the few sources of sweetness available during the cold months. And because it could be stored for weeks after ripening, it was a rare luxury that didn't require a pantry full of sugar or spice. But the medlar wasn't just a fruit, it was a metaphor. It taught patience. It taught humility. It reminded medieval people that value often hides beneath decay, and that not everything worth savoring is beautiful at first glance. In fact, the best things sometimes look like failures until they fully ripen. Modern agriculture, with its fast-paced production and airbrushed produce, had no place for the medlar. We replaced it with shiny apples and instant gratification. But in doing so, we may have lost a lesson deeper than taste. The medlar isn't just a forgotten fruit, it's a symbol of slow transformation. Ugly, odd, and misunderstood, it dared to say, "Don't judge me yet. My time is coming." And maybe that's exactly what our diets and our lives still need. It was uninvited, unstoppable, and utterly essential. Chickweed wasn't just a weed in medieval Europe. It was a nutritional lifeline hiding in plain sight. Imagine a tiny green plant with delicate white flowers growing between stones, along roadsides, in gardens, even in waste pits, and instead of pulling it out and tossing it, people actually ate it. Not because they were desperate, but because it was one of the healthiest things they could find. Chickweed didn't need to be planted. It didn't wait for your permission. It just showed up again and again through nearly every season except the dead of winter. It was like the volunteer worker of the plant kingdom, no invitation, no paycheck, but always delivering results. Medieval farmers couldn't stop it, so they embraced it. And rightly so, fresh chickweed contains up to 7 times more vitamin C than oranges by weight. In an age when scurvy and malnutrition killed as easily as war, this tiny plant was a quiet hero. Peasants foraged it in winter when nothing else grew. Nobles used it to add freshness to soups and stews. Its tender leaves could be eaten raw, boiled, or turned into medicinal teas to soothe inflammation, fever, and skin irritation. It was one of the few green vegetables available during the bleakest months, and it required no effort, no fields, no tools, no harvesting rituals. Just bend down and pick your vitamins off the ground. Yet somewhere along the way, modern farming declared war on chickweed. It was labeled a nuisance, sprayed with chemicals, and erased from our food vocabulary. Why? Because it didn't look cultivated. It didn't follow the rules. But neither did it fail. In fact, it outperformed most respectable crops in nutrition and resilience. In a world now chasing superfoods flown in from thousands of miles away, chickweed is a humbling reminder that sometimes the most powerful nourishment is growing right beneath our feet, ignored, unloved, and wild. What if survival didn't come from what we planted, but from what we failed to notice? Chickweed wasn't just a weed. It was a rebellion in green, quietly keeping Europe alive. If you heard someone say, "I'm growing Scorzonera," you might think they were casting a medieval curse or recovering from a contagious disease. Let's be honest, Scorzonera sounds like something your doctor would warn you about. But in reality, this poorly named root was one of the most nutritious, resilient, and essential vegetables in the medieval diet. It didn't just survive harsh winters, it thrived in them, quietly feeding generations, while other crops withered and died. Scorzonera, also known as black Salsify, was the unsung hero of monastery gardens and peasant fields alike. With its long, dark-skinned root and creamy white flesh, it looked unremarkable at best and repulsive at worst. But beneath that rough exterior was a sweet, nutty taste that hinted at asparagus and sunflower seeds, subtle, earthy, and deeply satisfying. This wasn't a vegetable for show. It was a vegetable for survival. Unlike delicate crops that required careful tending and precise harvest times, Scorzonera asked for very little. You planted it in the fall, and by winter it was ready to dig up whenever you needed it. And here's the kicker. It could be buried in sand in a cold cellar and kept fresh for up to 6 months. That's right. In a world without fridges, Scorzonera was nature's canned food, long-lasting, reliable, and packed with vitamins, iron, and fiber. Its reputation in medieval medicine was just as impressive. Herbalists brewed Scorzonera root tea to purify the blood and soothe upset stomachs. Monks valued it not only for its gentle taste during fasting, but also for its role in preventing illness when fresh greens were scarce. So why did we forget it? Modern agriculture favored looks over substance. Fast-growing, pretty vegetables with shelf appeal replaced this ugly workhorse. We traded in long-term nourishment for short-term convenience. But maybe it's time to reconsider. Scorzonera may sound like a medieval monster, but it was actually a guardian of health and hunger hiding in plain sight. Its strange name might scare you off, but its legacy that deserves a comeback. Imagine a plant that feeds you for 10 years straight, survives brutal winters, and never asks to be replanted. Sounds like a fantasy from a survival game, right? But this was reality in the Middle Ages. Meet the Welsh onion, the medieval vegetable that quietly outperformed most modern crops without ever demanding the spotlight. Now don't let the name fool you. Welsh onions aren't from Wales, and they're not true onions. They're a unique species altogether, a perennial gift that keeps on giving. Once planted, Welsh onions multiply into thick clumps year after year. A single root could feed a medieval family for a decade. In an era where replanting meant backbreaking labor, this miracle crop saved both time and life. But the true genius of the Welsh onion was its winter resilience. While other crops shriveled in the cold, Welsh onions stayed green and strong, offering precious vitamins when nothing else grew. During the leanest months, when fields were frozen, food stores low, and disease on the rise, these hardy greens became a lifeline. Their hollow shoots, packed with flavor and nutrients, brought much-needed brightness to otherwise bland winter stews and soups. In the hands of medieval cooks, Welsh onions worked overtime. They flavored broths, added bite to salads, and were even used in herbal remedies. One medieval gardening text claimed, "A single Welsh onion may nourish a hearth for 10 winters." That's not just a vegetable, that's a survival plan. So what happened? As modern agriculture chased bigger bulbs and faster harvests, the humble Welsh onion was shoved aside for common supermarket varieties. But in doing so, we lost something vital, a resilient, low-maintenance superfood that sustained people through famines, storms, and centuries. It's time we stopped seeing old-fashioned as outdated. The Welsh onion wasn't just practical, it was revolutionary. In a world facing climate uncertainty and rising food costs, maybe the answers don't lie in new technologies, but in ancient wisdom we've ignored for far too long. What if I told you that one of the most nutrient-packed superfoods of the Middle Ages wasn't planted? It just showed up uninvited, meat-fat hen, a wild, scrappy little plant that medieval people didn't just tolerate. They relied on it to survive. Fat hen wasn't some glamorous crop, carefully curated by royal gardeners. It was a weed, the kind that popped up in fields between stones on the edges of footpaths. But unlike modern weeds, we spray with chemicals, this one earned its place on the plate. It was the accidental hero of medieval farming, offering more protein than cabbage, more iron than spinach, and more calcium than kale. In a world where famine was always one bad season away, fat hen was a miracle hiding in plain sight. Peasants harvested it for soups and stews. Noble households served it during winters when nothing green grew. Even chickens benefited. Eating fat hen made them plumper and more productive, which is how the plant got its odd name. But the joke's on us. While it was feeding poultry, it was also secretly saving humans. During the harshest years, plagues, poor harvests, brutal winters, fat hen often made the difference between starvation and survival. Archaeologists have uncovered its seeds in medieval food waste pits, proving it was no fringe item. It was central to survival, especially for the poor, who had no access to proper farms or markets. So why did it vanish? Modern agriculture didn't like plants that didn't play by the rules. Fat hen couldn't be easily packaged, labeled, or mass-produced. It was wild, unpredictable, and it refused to fit inside neat corporate rows. So we declared war on it with herbicides and forgot that it ever fed millions. But here's the punchline in today's world, where health experts are desperately hunting for high-protein, iron-rich, sustainable greens. Fat hen checks every box, and yet it's still called a weed. Maybe the Middle Ages knew something we forgot. You don't always need to invent superfoods. Sometimes they grow under your feet, if you're wise enough to see them. Imagine celery, but if it hit the gym, drank 6 espresso shots, and joined a rock band. That's Lovage, the medieval herb, so bold, so flavorful, it made everything else in the garden taste like a backup singer. Today, most Americans have never heard of it. But back in the Middle Ages, Lovage was legendary. This towering bushy herb with its glossy leaves and hollow stems wasn't just grown, it was revered. Roman soldiers carried its seeds across Europe. Monks planted it in every monastery garden. Medieval cooks relied on it the way we rely on salt, because when you had Lovage, you didn't need much else. Its flavor was like celery cranked up to 11 with undertones of parsley, lemon, and spice. Just one sprig could transform an entire cauldron of bland stew into something that made peasants feel like royalty. But flavor was only half the story. Lovage was also a powerful medicinal ally. The entire plant leaves, root, seeds was used to treat digestive troubles, bloating, kidney issues, and more. Lovage tea was considered a cure-all in medieval medicine, prescribed for ailments from colds to melancholy. Think of it as the Middle Ages version of Tums kombucha and essential oils, all rolled into one rugged green plant. And here's the kicker: Lovage is a perennial powerhouse. It survives brutal winters, grows over 6 feet tall, and lives for decades. Once planted, it keeps coming back season after season like a loyal dog that also happens to spice up your dinner and heal your gut. So what happened? As international trade brought in more exotic spices and milder herbs like parsley and cilantro, Lovage's bold flavor became too much for modern palates. It quietly vanished from gardens and kitchens, replaced by herbs that were easier to market, but far less memorable. But maybe it's time for a comeback. In an age where people crave bold flavor and natural health remedies, Lovage deserves another shot at the spotlight. Because in a world full of bland, over-processed food, a little intensity might be exactly what we need. Imagine walking past a lush green patch in the middle of winter, overlooking it completely, just because it's called corn salad. No, it's not made from corn. No, it's not a salad mix from the grocery store. This humble medieval vegetable is perhaps the most tragically misunderstood food in history, ignored not for its taste or nutrition, but because of its name. Back in medieval Europe, corn meant grain, not maize. And corn salad wasn't a sweet yellow cob, it was a wild green that grew between rows of harvested grain, popping up just as other vegetables faded. To medieval farmers, it was a winter miracle. To us, it's a branding disaster. But if names could lie, nutrients never do. Corn salad is a cold-weather superfood offering 3 times the omega-3s of iceberg lettuce, plus a rich supply of iron and vitamin C. In the bleakest months when most of Europe was blanketed in frost, corn salad stayed green, soft, and full of life. It was the quiet kid in the class who ended up curing scurvy while everyone else was falling apart. Medieval peasants and nobility alike recognized its value. These delicate, nutty-tasting leaves were served fresh in salads or steamed into soups. Easy to grow, requiring no maintenance, and thriving in poor soil, it was nature's version of an overachiever that never asked for credit. It didn't need pampering, didn't need replanting, and yet provided life-saving nutrition when it was needed most. So why did it disappear? Modern agriculture favored crops that looked good on shelves, shipped well, and had names that didn't confuse consumers. Corn salad unfortunately lost the popularity contest Not because it wasn't healthy or tasty, but because it was too modest for the modern marketplace. And that's the tragedy and the lesson. Sometimes we ignore what's truly good for us because it doesn't scream for attention. Corn salad didn't need flash, it needed recognition. And in a world obsessed with superfoods, maybe it's time we welcomed this forgotten green back to our plates, no name change required. Imagine a herb so powerful, so intense, that just one leaf could flavor an entire dish and keep it from spoiling for days. Now imagine we forgot about it, because it was just too bold for modern taste buds. That herb was Tansy, the loudest voice in the medieval kitchen, a plant so potent it flavored meals, preserved meat, repelled insects, and even treated parasites all at once. In the Middle Ages, Tansy wasn't just an ingredient, it was an experience. With a flavor described as bitter, spicy, slightly sweet, and utterly unforgettable, it was the culinary equivalent of turning your seasoning up to full volume. Think parsley on steroids. Tansy didn't whisper, it screamed, and medieval cooks loved it for that very reason. It appeared in everything from Easter puddings to savory stews to sweetened candies. One popular recipe, Tansy pudding, was a fried eggy herbed cake reserved for special occasions. This was no ordinary green. It was the bold punctuation mark of medieval cuisine. But Tansy wasn't just about taste, it was about survival. Its essential oils acted as natural preservatives, extending the life of baked goods and meats in a time before refrigeration. And while it sat in your pantry, it worked double duty in your medicine cabinet. Monks brewed Tansy tea to treat worms, fevers, and stomach issues. They planted it by doorways to keep away flies and evil spirits alike. This was a herb that earned its keep every single day. So what happened? In the age of subtle flavors and sanitized diets, Tansy became too much. Milder herbs like parsley and thyme took over. The boldness that once made Tansy invaluable became its downfall. It faded from our kitchens not because it failed, but because we did. We forgot how to handle strength. Bringing Tansy back means rediscovering flavor with courage. It's a reminder that not everything needs to be soft and polite. Sometimes the strongest ingredients, the ones that bite, burn, and linger, are the ones that protected and nourished us the most. Tansy didn't disappear. We just stopped listening. Maybe it's time we let this fierce little herb make some noise again. Imagine walking along a rocky beach, waves crashing beside you, and beneath your feet, growing wild and unnoticed, is a plant that once saved lives. Not treasure, not magic, just a humble vegetable that could prevent one of history's deadliest diseases, scurvy. This was sea kale, the forgotten guardian of medieval coastlines. Long before citrus fruits were shipped across oceans, coastal Europeans relied on this rugged plant to survive brutal winters and sea voyages. It thrived in salty soil where nothing else dared to grow. While other crops withered in frosts, sea kale stood tall, offering its tender shoots, broad leaves, and powerful nutrients to anyone wise enough to harvest it. It was the unsung hero of medieval nutrition, rich in vitamin C, 6 times more than lemons by weight. For fishing villages and monasteries with limited access to fresh food, sea kale wasn't just a side dish, it was the difference between life and death. Its young, blanched shoots were cooked like asparagus, while the mature leaves were used like cabbage. Medieval cooks praised it for its mild, sweet taste, a rare trait among wild greens. And unlike many other wild vegetables that required taming, sea kale asked for nothing. It grew without care, without planting, without praise. It just gave. And yet we forgot it. In the age of shiny supermarket shelves and mass agriculture, sea kale didn't fit the mold. It was too wild, too coastal, too unbranded. A plant that needed no fertilizer or tending was pushed aside by vegetables that demanded packaging labels and marketing campaigns. But what if we brought it back? What if the healthiest foods aren't in exotic powders or vitamin bottles, but quietly growing in places we've learned to ignore? Sea kale is more than a vegetable. It's a symbol of overlooked resilience. A reminder that sometimes the most valuable things are not cultivated, but discovered. In a world obsessed with what's new, maybe it's time we look back and listen to the wisdom growing by the sea. What if your salad greens could also paint a warrior's face? What if the same plant used to dye royal robes and battle flags was once eaten in spring soups? Welcome to the strange double life of Woad, a medieval plant that was both color and cuisine weapon and nourishment. To most historians, Woad is remembered for its bold blue dye used to color everything from monks' robes to Celtic warriors' bodies. It was so pungent during processing that medieval kings banned Woad dye houses near castles. The fermentation stank so badly, locals compared it to rotting corpses soaked in vinegar. And yet before it became a dye, Woad was something else entirely: food. That's right before the leaves developed their famous pigment, the young shoots were harvested in early spring and eaten fresh. Slightly peppery, similar to baby mustard greens, they added a much-needed bite to soups and salads during the hunger gap, those bleak weeks when winter stores ran low and nothing else had sprouted. Woad was a lifesaver in disguise, a humble weed hiding beneath centuries of textile fame. But its fate was sealed by its own usefulness. As European empires grew, Woad's value as a commercial dye skyrocketed. Entire fields were planted just to feed the vats of cloth makers. No one wanted to eat it anymore. They wanted to wear it. The blue was vibrant, lasting, and symbolic of power. Even Queen Elizabeth I insisted on garments dyed in Woad, a plant she would never have thought to put on her plate. And so, like many things in history, its most human use was forgotten. We turned nourishment into profit and flavor into fashion. Today, very few know that behind every medieval blue tunic was a plant that once fed the poor, offered vitamins when they were most needed, and connected us to the earth before it ever touched a loom. Woad's story is a quiet tragedy wrapped in royal colors, a reminder that food isn't always just about taste, but about timing, necessity, and memory. Maybe the next time we talk about plant-based living, we should ask, which parts of the past did we wear, and which did we leave behind? Imagine buying the latest iPhone and only using it as a flashlight. That's exactly what we've done with turnips. For centuries, we've praised their hearty roots, boiled, roasted, mashed, but we forgot their most powerful feature was growing above ground. In medieval Europe, turnip greens weren't waste, they were survival. While the bulbous root kept peasants fed during winter, the leafy tops were what kept them alive through the rest of the year. These greens weren't just garnish. They packed 4 times more calcium, 3 times more vitamin A, and twice the protein of the roots themselves. In a time when nutrition was a luxury and vitamins were an unknown word, these leaves were literal medicine. And they were free. Farmers carefully harvested the outer leaves while leaving the root to grow, meaning they got multiple harvests from one plant. Medieval cooks used them in broths, stews, and pottages, blending their sharp, peppery flavor with grains and legumes. For the poor, they were the most accessible greens in early spring. For the sick, they were prescribed as part of recovery. For pregnant women, they meant survival. What's truly astonishing is how long we've ignored them. With the rise of modern agriculture and supermarkets, our obsession with aesthetics made us reject anything imperfect or leafy. Turnip greens were discarded, tossed aside in favor of picture-perfect roots. It's like throwing away 60% of your paycheck because the envelope was wrinkled. And yet, they're still here, still growing, still thriving in forgotten gardens and rural corners, still holding secrets. Our ancestors once understood that nourishment doesn't always come from what's shiny and underground. Sometimes it grows in plain sight, bold and bitter and brilliant. Turnip greens aren't a side dish, they're a symbol of resilience, of value in the overlooked, of the nutrients we're throwing away every time we trim the tops. So next time you see those leafy stems at the market, don't toss them. Treasure them. Cook them. And remember, in the Middle Ages, they didn't just eat to survive. They ate what worked. In a world obsessed with perfection, perfect bodies, perfect homes, perfect vegetables, we often overlook the quiet, imperfect things that offer the most value. Turnip greens, once a staple of medieval survival, are a powerful reminder that nourishment doesn't always come in shiny packaging. These humble leaves were richer in vitamins and minerals than the root we still eat today. Yet modern food systems have taught us to throw them away without a second thought. This isn't just about vegetables. It's about how we live. How often do we discard the parts of our lives that seem unglamorous? Our routines, our emotions, our aging parents, our own bodies, simply because they're not polished or trendy. But just like turnip greens, those overlooked parts may be where our greatest nourishment lies. Resilience isn't built on what looks good. It's built on what lasts, what grows back, and what quietly sustains us when life gets lean. The lesson is simple but deep: pay attention to the overlooked. Whether it's a forgotten vegetable, an old friend, or a skill you stopped using years ago, there's value there. In a culture that encourages waste, choosing to reclaim what matters is a revolutionary act. Sometimes the wisdom of the past can feed our future. You just have to look beyond the root. If this journey through forgotten medieval superfoods surprised you, imagine how much more there is to uncover. Which vegetable shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments. I read everyone. If you found this fascinating, save the video so you can revisit these hidden gems anytime. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started uncovering the lost secrets of history, food, and survival. Your support helps bring more of these eye-opening stories to life. Let's keep the past alive, one forgotten bite at a time.